Okay.
So I think, like some guys are looking at some canary seed, but that's got some big premium associated with it if you haven't been in it over here. But I think guys are going to look around, especially with when you see the wheat up again. That's not a great thing.
Yeah.
We're struggling to even get over the $8 mark with it. Hard to make money, at least on this side of the province where it's been drier, at $8 for sure.
Yeah, like I know I seen a couple of notes out that there's a couple companies went out with, we'll call it stink bids on peas, because they're trying to indicate what they think the market will do. And the bottom line for that was just take a breath, let the market take in what it needs to get its mind around some stuff for a hot minute, and then reset. So you don't need to be taking $6 or $7 P bids today, right?
Right. Well, back in the day, I think it was like 450 Ps. And by the time I got them in, my splits were worth more than my good Ps were on the contract. That's back in the day there. I did hear of a guy taking in canola, finished off his contract, had tons left over, and they gave him like $11.50 or $11.30 a bushel for him. Mm-hmm. Kind of a too bad, so sad.
Yeah, they took lots on the basis, and then the futures impacted as well on that, because they can, and there's a bit of uncertainty and stuff. But there's a fraction of the oil that China actually buys. They've got actually 2,200 plants over in China. They've got some mega ones and lots of smaller ones, but they want oil. And then the meal side, they've got hogs to feed and all that stuff. And so we'll see from a political side what happens in the next bit. But right now, it's just don't get real worked up and emotionally make a call. If you need cash, that's a different thing. Then you can look at replacement strategies and stuff. And we're going to have a call in a little bit down the road here on what's best, not what's best, but options for that kind of stuff. Hey, so, but
yep. The other thing I was going to say, I don't know if anybody's noticed it, but Cargill's pulled all their bids on canola, at least over here. Nothing at all. Yeah.
How are they signing up CSCO? There's still guys wanting to grow that shit.
Yeah, I don't know how that one is, but for bids right now, there's nothing. Zero.
I wonder how much that is real and how much is making an impression on stuff. So plants crush every goddamn day. That makes me really curious about the motivation behind some of that stuff. But
yeah, well, like I said, they're 3 weeks behind, so they can step out of the market and then figure out what they need in that meantime, and then come back in, because the rail's 3 weeks behind for them. So unless they're trucking it, and they probably have enough just to kind of keep the plant going right now, but unless they're trucking it, that's the only way it's they're going to get they can't catch up, and they'll catch up in in a month or whatever when the thaw hits, and they'll do the cars will just come flooding into the elevators when the farmer can't really haul.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, we're going to shut that down now, and thanks a lot for that, Greg. Really appreciate it. It's we're into the call a few minutes. I think there'll be some people still that hop in and out, but want to welcome everybody to March 13th Coffee Talk with iFarm Ag, and want to thank you again, Brian, for taking in as a pickup from last week. There was lots of calls and dialogue about a couple of bears in the fields, and one being Canada the Thistle, but a primary one being Kochia. And Brian, you'd asked if it would be okay to bring your insights forward on this one as a complete topic for our time. And I know you're a wealth of information. You're a great resource. You're product agnostic. You will be looking at what's the right solutions for folks and all that, and that's what makes this really hopefully valuable for those on the call. And then also for those that have found winning things on their own farm enterprises that are working well, if you feel you've instituted a program that's working well. We're going to have some open floor time to talk through all of that. But with that, I'd like just to turn it over to Brian, and really appreciate you coming again. And how's things going in your world?
Oh, it's a busy time of the year.
Yeah. Excellent.
Wrapping up for spring. I was listening to the conversation about cropping choices and what farmers are going to do. I know some folks in the canola industry fairly well, and certainly there's a lot of frustration right now.
Mm-hmm.
But specific to canola, a lot of folks booked their seed early, so they would have got seed back in November, December, January. So they're kind of torn right now. Do they try and take seed back, switch to something else? Do they stick to their guns, keep their canola special crop rotations intact? My guess is guys are going to hunker down and say, well, I've booked it. I'm going to keep my rotation roughly similar. I will shift out some of the smaller acreage crops where I can, but really I've got to farm. I'm going to plant a crop. I'm going to stick to my guns and ride this out.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good advice. And not only are guys playing with market dynamics, that absolutely is there, but there's tools to utilize for some of that stuff. But as a foundation, you've got your cropping plan and rotation from an agronomic perspective. You also have your herbicide rotation and plan in place, and and all that. So you can't just throw everything up in the air and knee-jerk a bunch of stuff. And that's where our conversation today is hopefully going to help us in terms of optimizing every acre that we're growing stuff on. And this bear of a kochia plant, it's a lot of people that haven't heard about it 2 years ago, they're wondering what it is, and now they know what it is in their own operations too.
And don't worry, the crushers share the frustration of farmers. They're trying to figure out what the heck to do. Do they throw a bid out now, knowing that supposing the tariffs get changed tomorrow, then are they out of the market? It's tough on them too.
Yeah. It's
okay.
Thanks.
So kochia, this has become the problem child for a lot of Western Canada, particularly the brown soil zones, Eastern Alberta, a lot of Southern Saskatchewan. We'll talk about options later. There's really no magic bullet, but in order to understand how we got here, I think it's important to understand the background, the history, the biology of kochia. What is it that makes kochia so much worse than a lot of the other weeds we have in Western Canada? And then after that, what are some options for management? What are some best options for control? Recognizing that, as you pointed out earlier, there's no silver bullet. And anybody expecting herbicides are going to bail us out is going to be very, very disappointed. So here's the historic distribution. I trust everybody can see the map here.
I see your slide.
Yes?
Yep.
Okay. So this is historically where you would have found kochia like 30, 40 years ago. Again, you can see where it kind of fits. East of the Rocky Mountains, the drier zones where typically cereals would be the predominant crop. Over the last 20 years, this has changed. You're now seeing it head north and a little bit to the west. So now you've got kochia, some pretty serious pockets around the Saskatoon area. There's some up in the Peace region as well, creeping a little bit more into Manitoba. So it's on the move. And typically brown soil zone, it's been moving north. Canada Thistle, ironically, has been moving south. And it's based on a number of factors, which I'll talk about in a second, but primarily what we're doing and what Mother Nature's doing. It is not native to North America. That's something that a lot of folks don't know. It was unintentionally introduced in the United States. They think about 1900. You notice kochia in the fall, it has some pretty nice red or orange colors. And unfortunately, gardeners like them a little too much and it escaped. Member of the goosefoot family, like lamb's quarters, Palmer amaranth, redroot pigweed. It does like heat and higher carbon situations. It also likes nitrogen. So for those folks in irrigation country where I put a lot of nitrogen on there, Kochia doesn't seem to mind. If it does get too much at once, you will get toxic levels of nitrate accumulating, which is why you have issues with feeding it to livestock. From a competitive perspective, it can grow up to 7 feet tall with competition. It'll actually stretch out 3 to 4 feet without competition. It is a drought-resistant forage in the Southwest to some degree. It is also a food source for wildlife. Here's something that's kind of novel: built-in population control mechanism, i.e. Kochia will actually limit the competition around it, including other kochia plants. Generally, unfortunately, resistant to diseases and insects. And there is claims that it has beneficial health effects. I can't imagine what they would be, but for the naturopath, there's some belief that it might have a benefit for immune systems. So here's where it gets interesting and tough. Kochia actually has very low dormancy. So if you control it 1 year and there's a few seeds left, they will germinate the following year, but 2 years down the road, not many of them survive, less than 5%. So if you keep it under control for a couple of years or minimize seed spread, you can reduce the population numbers. It's a shallow germinator, 1/4 of an inch. From a temperature perspective, most of the seeds will germinate between 4 and 41. Optimum range is 15 to 20, but it can germinate in lower temperatures as well. Salt concentrations don't bother kochia. If you drive through the country, you'll notice the low spots, especially the saline soil. Kochia doesn't seem to care what the heck the soil concentration is. pH range, greater than 60% with a pH range between 2 and 8. Now, if you think of Western Canada, the pHs in the brown soil zone are higher. Black soil zones are slightly lower. So as long as you've got the right conditions, salt, heat, pH, it's go. And then it can also germinate under drought conditions, which is unfortunately sometimes what we run into in the spring here. Root growth under favorable growing conditions, you can go up to 7 meters wide and over 2 meters deep. Most of the time you won't see that. Under severe drought conditions, kochia can go up to 5 meters vertically, which is why sometimes kochia is the only thing growing. If you excavate that soil, kochia at or below the permanent wilting point will still be green and continue limiting growth while the crop is dead. And that's quite often what you see in the fall. The crop may be dead, maybe it's desiccated off, harvest is done, no moisture in the soil, and yet kochia is still standing. Seed production, flowers don't have petals, they're found in clusters. They can self-pollinate and outcross, and that's one of the challenges here with the whole herbicide resistance piece. Genetically, they're very complex, but they can self-pollinate, outcross with other plants. So when you combine that with a lot of genetic diversity, that's why you see herbicide resistance spread so rapidly. Up to 15,000 seeds per plant. The stems are genetically programmed to break at maturity and tumble. And that's where you get a lot of your seed dispersion after the crop is off, tumbling and seed drop. Now, ironically, even though it's tough, it's not very competitive, especially if you've got a really strong grass or cereal crop and good growing conditions. So it often ends up growing in roadside and waste, gravel pits, because there's very little competition for it. So I've heard it called a superweed. That's probably not too far off. So why is it getting worse? First of all, there's what we're doing, and then there's what kochia itself can do. We've been extending our crop rotations, and we've reduced summer fall dramatically. At the same time, we've increased our acreages of specialty crops, especially pulse crops, which don't always have great crop competition, and in some cases, very, very few herbicide choices. At the same time, we've got the great enabler, which was new technology, reduced tillage equipment, high clearance sprayers, direct seeding equipment, which means we do more acres faster, but it also means we can spray more faster as well. We've also had dry, hot, more variable growing conditions, along with incomplete weed control. The consequence of that has been Group 2 tolerant kochia. Pretty much all kochia is considered Group 2 tolerant. Group 9, I've seen reports that suggest up to 70–80% of kochia is now Group 9 or glyphosate tolerant. We are seeing Group 4 resistance showing up, including cross resistance to dicamba and fluroxypure at some spots. And we are now seeing Group 14 resistance show up as well in the last 2 to 3 years. Just from an economic loss perspective, moisture and environmental conditions will dictate that. The type, stage, and overall vigor of the crop, the time of the weed emergence, and the density of the weed population. But for anybody who's got a severe kochia infestation, you know pretty quickly that it's going to hit hard. So this just came out a couple of weeks ago. Here's the distribution of kochia from 2019 to 2023. The dark blue spots is where you've got much more severe infestations in terms of the frequency, the number of fields that it's showing up. Probably not a surprise to anybody on the call here. Typically the brown soil zones, typically what are drier zones, typically where it would have been a cereal summer fall rotation, but now we're growing a lot more pulse crops. Specific to glyphosate tolerant kochia, it was discovered in Kansas in 2007, discovered in the county of Warner, southern Alberta in fall of 2011, and now it's been spreading north, mostly east, and to a lesser degree west. So the challenge then becomes, we know what kochia can do, we know where it does best, we know about the biology, how it thrives and survives. How do we manage this? And are we going to be forced back into tillage? For those of us who've been in the industry a long time, the assumption always was, well, your chemical companies are working on new actives. So, eventually there's going to be a new active to control kochia or resistant wild oats or other resistant weeds. Unfortunately, I would not bank on that. It's not that they don't want to, but the crop protection industry is simply not going to be able to bail out farmers with new technology or new modes of action. Hold on a second, I've got something urgent.
Sure.
The easy stuff has already been found. The cost of discovery and regulatory has gone up dramatically. Most of the major crop protection companies have limited resources. They're putting those resources into high returning areas like seed and traits, biologicals, mergers, acquisitions, and cost cutting. So the onus is going to be on farmers and the industry to diversify our weed management practices, because the industry is not going to be able to solve this. So I saw this a few weeks ago. Some of you may have heard there is now a Group 28 from FMC. Looks like it's going to be targeted to rice in the southern US first. But the take home here is there have been no new herbicide modes of action since the late 80s. So anybody expecting a new active, or we're going to be flooded with new actives, is going to be disappointed. So that brings us back to what do we do? How do we manage this? We have to start with a systems approach. Sanitization year-round. That means we can't just park the sprayer and park our equipment in June and forget about it. We're going to have to think about a year-round plan. Diversify crop rotations, increase crop competition, manage herbicide use. optimize spray applications, and destroy weed seeds. Field sanitation, not just equipment. Don't allow mature plants to remain standing. Tumbleweeds will move. That means tilling, mowing, potentially even burning or grazing patches to make sure they don't set seed. Means cleaning field equipment between fields. Decontaminate harvesting equipment before you move from one field to another or to the neighbor's fields or to one across the road. Control plants on the entire farm, including roadsides and yard sites, by mowing or removing weeds. This is awkward, it's time-consuming and frustrating, but if we're going to manage kochia long-term, this is something we need to look at. Crop rotation. Don't rule out perennial crops where it works. Wherever possible, choose a crop that is both a strong competitor and one that will allow herbicide use in crop. For example, cereals and canola are better bets. Pulse crops have challenges, particularly lentils. Lentils are a great option from an economic perspective, but they have challenges with weed control. Scout fields to understand the extent of the problem, what you need to do. The primary objective is always to reduce seed production so that 2 years down the road, you can actually reduce the problem. Maximize crop competition, use high quality seed, increase seeding rates for a thicker crop stand, narrower row spacing, place fertilizer as close to the crop as you can to benefit your crop, potentially seed later for better crop competition. And that's another challenge because we've been telling farmers for years now, especially canola, to seed earlier, to beat the heat. Doesn't seem to impact the stand very much. Typically, we would, in the old days when we did tillage, you'd till first, then seed a little bit later. So in a sense, we've made it more difficult for ourselves. Herbicides. I don't think we need to panic and say that, well, herbicides are over. I'm going to have to pull out the cultivator and go back to tillage again. We have herbicides that work. We just have to use them more carefully. Keep the rates up. Keep the water volumes high for coverage and control. Spray whenever possible during the best weather conditions, ideally warm, humid, low wind, appropriate speed. Use tank mixes. There's a lot of data that says hitting weeds with 2 modes of action is effective. It also reduces the risk of herbicide resistance cropping up. Rotate herbicide mixes using different modes of action on the same field and weeds over time. Consider tillage in places of herbicide for chem fallow. And look at other integrated weed management practices so that you're not relying only on herbicides for weed management. From a timing perspective, we know that kochia is not competitive under good growing conditions. It loves poor growing conditions, so it's best to control emerged plants. They're very susceptible when they're young. Lots of the in-crop cereal herbicides say you can go up to the 8-leaf. I would recommend going as early as possible when the weeds are there. Use multiple modes of action herbicides. For in-crop, your best choices for kochia control are in cereals and, to a lesser extent, canola. Not so good with pulse crops. Most guys are doing this, but herbicide-tolerant canola. Group 10 might be a slightly, glufosinate-tolerant, maybe a better option than Roundup Ready, simply because we're using Roundup or glyphosate in so many other situations on the farm. Multiple mode of action product for cereals will give you the best control and reduce your risk. For pulse crops, you really need to focus on the most powerful pre-seed products you can get because in crop are somewhat limited. And again, go early. Control is more difficult with larger plants and poor growing conditions. Pre-harvest, Strongly recommend a desiccant for harvest aid where possible. Prevent further seed production. Consider and add in products such as Viking carfentrazone with your glyphosate to get 2 modes of action. If you've got post-harvest control options, winter annuals, kochia will keep growing. Don't let them go.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
Before you move into the various chemicals to use, I don't know what you've got left for slides, but I'd like to have a little quick discussion about some of the other options beyond chemistry before you go through what is in our toolbox for chemicals, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, why don't we do that now?
You're good? Okay.
Yep.
So some things that have come about that I've stumbled across, and I've got some real smart people on the call, people that have experience with various things and that. But one thing that comes to my mind would be what percent of kochia do you feel would make it through to harvest and run through the combine where it gets in the hopper or gets blown out the back? Do you have is there any idea on that?
No, because it depends how effective your weed control was in the spring and in crop.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
if you get 90% control, 85 is considered control. Anything above that is considered great. If you get 95%, it's going to depend on your stand. 95% control, a good crop, let's say a cereal crop, high yielding wheat crop, you're only going to have a handful of plants that'll actually make it through.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a very thin crop, let's say it's a pulse crop, maybe a very thin canola crop, it's been too hot and dry, then the percentage that comes through is going to be much higher.
Mm-hmm.
So getting it before it sets seed is the trick here.
I understand. So yeah, that's why I kind of started on the back end of that, and we've got one of the farmers on the call that have utilized it, and I'm not going to pick on them, but those seed terminators, or we've got other companies that are doing various things that basically beat the bejesus and crack every seed that comes out of the back. Is that what you got there? There you go. Yeah, and that I think is one tool on the back end of it to contemplate. So there you go. Great minds think alike. I'll take the gimme on that for me, but thanks for having that. That's really cool.
Now this started in Australia, back probably 10, 15 years ago, because Australia was hit pretty hard by herbicide resistance on the group 1s and group 2s before it really took off here. So rather than trying to keep doing the same thing over and over again, they've been experimenting with equipment on the back end of combines.
Yeah.
And Ag Canada's been doing that work here, and it's been relatively positive. The challenge becomes another operation, adding additional cost to your equipment. So I don't know how far it's gone with farmers in Western Canada as of today. How many are looking at it? How many are doing it? My guess is it probably hasn't really taken off at a farm level yet. It's more at the academic and the research stage.
Yeah, we've got, I'm aware of at least one that has had it for a few years. And so they've got the data to backstop how that comes in. They'd probably have some ROI numbers on the investment. I think it was like $100K a pop or something like that. And it takes more than 1 horsepower to run it. So you need the right equipment, the power plant to keep that running and all the rest of it. But I anticipate there'd be some data to understand what the cost is versus what they've now been able to do for their burn-offs and all the rest of it, because it's knocking out the weeds. It is. So anyway, that was one thing. Another thing that came to mind, and again, this is through discussion with people smarter than myself, but kochia does not, if I understand it correctly, like certain pH levels. And are there fertility options to assist a farm to make it so that it is plant advantageous for crop and less advantageous for kochia, where it doesn't like to grow in certain spots? Do you have an opinion on the fertility that people can do for soil amendment or any of that kind of stuff?
Soil amendment is difficult because the volume of additives you need to put on to actually influence your soil pH are extremely high.
Mm-hmm.
Kochia seems to like saline soils, seems to do better in higher pH soils, but it's really a combination of the soil type, your salinity, your moisture, and your temperature conditions. So conditioning soil by itself would be difficult and very, very expensive. What you can do is your fertilizer placement. Try and give your crop the best chance to compete. So broadcasting would not be a recommended practice. You're feeding the weeds, but anything that'll place your fertilizer as close as possible where the crop will get it first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to give it the jump. Okay. Another one was there's a bit of talk again about on the pulse side of things. It's an old thing maybe being revisited of intercropping clear field canola with lentils and stuff like that. I don't know if you have much experience or any take on that kind of stuff.
I've heard about it. I don't have a ton of experience. I know some farmers in northern Saskatchewan that were doing it. And from what I know, it worked okay. But that area also doesn't have a serious kochia problem. Mm-hmm. The black soil zones, kochia doesn't like it as much. It's wetter, your pH a little bit lower. It doesn't seem to do well there. And you also don't get the heat. So it's a possible option. I'm just not sure how effective that would be in the key lentil growing areas where we want a little bit of heat, where it tends to be a little bit drier. And with Clearfield, yeah, you're still stuck with a Clearfield herbicide option, and that's not great for kochia management.
Right on. Yeah. You got to start with.
We need to keep looking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those are the things that came to my mind, and we'll just, before we get into the chemistry part of things, has anybody got any questions on that piece of things, or have you found something on your farm that has been helpful on your own with any of this kind of stuff, or do you have any questions? Just give it a second. Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for indulging me.
Sure. So move on to herbicide layering. That's kind of, I'll call it a buzzword, but at the same time, the most practical thing we can do from a herbicide management perspective. Longer term planning and record keeping is an absolute must. We need, for those of you that are in canola, wheat, lentil rotation, like I described below, you have to have a 3 or 4 year herbicide management plan. You need to know what you've done and where you're going to need herbicides, particularly for lentils, because there's so few good options for lentils. Multiple active ingredients from different herbicide groups at different crop stages. Minimize the use of the same active ingredients in the same year. And I'm specifically mentioning glyphosate because we've become so reliant on glyphosate for pre-seed. If you're growing Roundup Ready crops, in crop, pre-harvest, and post-harvest, we're actually inviting trouble because we keep using it over and over again, mostly by itself. That's an invitation for increased herbicide resistance. Save your key actives for crops with the fewest herbicide options. So that means for lentils, hang on to your pre-seed group 14, 15s. In crop, Clearfield lentils, you only have a group 2 option really that's worth talking about. So save your group 2s for your pulse crops. And then from a pre-harvest perspective, a diquat. So the example I threw up here is a wheat, canola, lentil rotation. For wheat, pre-seed, do you really need to use glyphosate? In crop, you've got a group 1, or you could use a group 2, depending on what the rest of your rotation is. But assuming you're growing lentils, a pinoxidin, a clodinafop, mixed with a group 4 broadleaf. In situations where you have group 4 tolerant kochia, you might add a group 6 or a 27 to that. Pre-harvest, getting ready for canola. maybe a group 9 is there because you did not use it in your pre-seed. And then if you are growing canola next year, edge. Put your edge down in the fall. It's not going to get everything, but it's going to get your canola off to a fairly clean start. If you have to use a pre-seed, you can use a group 9 or something like a group 4 and 6 now. There's that option. In crop, I don't take a position on whether glufosinate canola is better than Roundup Ready canola. But at least if you go with Liberty Link, you're using a group 10. Post-harvest, if needed, a 9 and a 2. And if you are growing lentils in year 3, you have to clean it up the fall before. So you're almost forced to use glyphosate the year before you grow lentils. If lentils is year number 3, group 14, 15 focus. In crop, you're really limited to group 2. If you've got a fairly hefty grass infestation, you might need to put a group 1 in there as well. And then a pre-harvest or desiccant group 22. Now, if you've got a longer rotation where you're throwing another wheat in there or barley, it gets easier because cereals, you have more options. But on a 3-year rotation like this, you have to save the stuff for lentils because that has the least number of options.
Great. We have a question, Greg.
Brian, so just, I know there's lots of guys on the call and I don't know what they have for Kochia, but when you're dealing with canola and glufosinate, I would say like you can go from that 133 to that 162 or whatever. But a lot of that, I'm in a dry area, I see Kochia all the time. Earlier the better, plus lots of water. Like
100% agree.
Management. Yeah.
100%.
One thing on this that I did see you had a group 3 for post-harvest. We have access, like there's access to, there's Avidex, Treflan, Fortress, and Edge that works with some of this cropping. What's your take on that?
I'd probably go to Edge first because it's got the broadest spectrum, especially Kochia.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at an Avidex or a Fortress, it's triolate and trifluralin. Your weed spectrum isn't quite as sharp. It's not quite as broad. So the idea would be to hit Kochia with another mode of action. That's why you want Edge.
Yeah, there's some research that Treflan had some action on Kochia way back on some of their first labels. And then now it doesn't show up on it for whatever the reason, and that. But the Edge being absolutely the one that may have some action on the Kochia as well. Again, it's just another mode as well, right? So.
Well, the other thing about Edge is it does have a direct seeding or reduced tillage label application as well.
Yeah.
So if you are in a direct seeding, provided that you're not disturbing your soil, less than 30% disturbance, putting it on in the fall, heavy harrowing it in just to get it in the soil surface, the control levels are actually not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's all the talk that they used to sell is that it removes the weed before they compete and before they're using your FERT and all the rest of it. And there's still an economic case for some of that as well.
There is. The challenge is the cost of that. If you look at the cost of Edge, I'm guessing it's $25-30 an acre. The high end would be if you go further north where you've got higher organic matter. So that tends to limit the potential of it. Where I'm from, guys do a lot of it in the fall for peas the following year, and they're pretty happy with it. But unfortunately, it drives up your cost.
Sure. Great. We have another question, Wilson.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Wilson.
Hey, yeah, I was just gonna add that's the same rotation that I follow there on that slide. And one thing I do, the post-harvest canola, I'll do Edge, harrow Edge in, and then spray Fierce on top of it for the lentil year the next year, and that seems to do provide really good control for lentils, especially because you don't have that in-crop option.
I think that's a great idea.
On average, Wilson, what is your in-crop action then? What do you normally see? I know it can be weather dependent, but what do you usually rely on if you got to do something in-crop?
For lentils?
Yeah.
Generally, we do Sencor or Metribuzin, whatever.
Yeah.
And like Quizalifop or something like that. Got to split them off. It's a bit of a pain in the butt, but that's generally what we do because we got some group 2 resistant mustard. So.
Okay. And then on your Sencor, are you doing just one bit heavier application, or do you do the split application on the Sencor along with a separate one of Quiz or Clethodim or whatever?
We just do one, just time. 2 probably would be better, but just time wise, we do one. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. And then on the back end, do you typically diquat it?
Typically, yeah.
Okay. No, cool.
And then a question for Wilson.
Pre-seed would be like a gold wing, like glyphosate, the 14 and the 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
When you do your Sencor, you're putting like a fertilizer with it to help the plant recover though, right?
We do sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I think it does help. But I don't know how much of it actually translates to yield. We haven't done any scientific testing on it, so I don't know.
Yeah, so the reason I brought it up is I've done it with or without, and I find when you do the full shot, you set the plant back pretty good and without it. So I wanted to see what you thought, and then when we're talking about just at the group kind of.
Yeah, well, it definitely makes it look better, that's for sure.
Okay, no, I just wanted to see what you do there.
Yeah, I'd like to actually do strips and run the combine over it and see, because sometimes making it look better doesn't translate to yield. So we just are undecided on that.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your take on that, Wilson. Really appreciate that very much.
Yeah, I do as well. It's important. You're doing a good thing there by mixing a Metribuzin in your herbicide rotation. It is kind of hard on the crop and the spectrum is limited, but when it comes right down to it, we need to keep every option on the table. So strictly from a Viking perspective, we have a molecule for pretty much everything. I would add that for cereals next year, we expect to have a registration for our version of Simplicity. And I'm in the process of submitting a label for pyrosulfatol, a group 27 option for in-crop as well. So with any luck at all, we'll have both of those as options for next year. So wheat, from a pre-seed perspective, right now, our sulfentrazone does not have wheat on the label. We've submitted for that. We expect to get it next year. Plus tribenuron. In crop, you can go with a group 2 like flucarbazone, a group 1 like cladinifop or pinoxidin. In crop, we've got a huge number of options for cereals, whether it be Calmar F2, Larvix, Stavanger for perennials, Trica if you need another mode of action in there. Edge, you'll need to talk to our friends over at Gowan. Canola, if you do need a pre-seed, I'll have to recommend a competitive product. We have a great glufosinate option. And for post-harvest, glyphosate, tribenuron, or something different. Lentils, you're looking at in-crop or pre-seed focus, so group 415. In-crop, imazamox or Felon, or Metribuzin, as was mentioned, and then pre-harvest diquat. So we've got an option for just about everything you need.
Before we move from that, if anybody needs a translation of those names, I'm happy to share that with you. as well. And then the second thing is we've actually in this year we have access to post-patent granular edge and Treflan, obviously the post-patent name stuff, ethylfurlan, trifluralin, and all the rest of it. So we happen to have that available too. So yeah, thank you.
So to move on, you have herbicide-resistant Kochia. Follow the clues. Patches will typically have no clear boundary or pattern. Quite often, the patch will follow somewhat machinery pathways because the seeds are spread by combine or soil moving equipment. May not have distinct boundaries or strips that you would see in a spray miss. Might be one patch that gets away whereas the rest of the field is clean. Keep good records and check to make sure that you've been rotating your groups appropriately. And this is what the first field of resistant kochia in southern Alberta looked like. You could see where the weeds tumbled across the field and spread seeds as they went. So bottom line for kochia management, think about it as a systems approach. There's no silver bullet, but we've talked about a lot of the options that are available right now. Start clean, stay clean, crop rotation, crop competition, herbicide application and efficacy, mix and rotate herbicides, and harvest weed seed control to reduce the number of seeds available for next year. Anything on kochia that somebody else would like to bring up?
Thanks for that. It's very helpful. And what I was going to say is that Brian will remain is a great resource. So if you do decide after the fact that you'd like to have that conversation with him about something, just let me know and I'll help make it work.
Good. Thanks, Dean.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to move a little quicker. I've got 10 minutes. I don't want to keep people from the rest of the day. So Canada Thistle. Here's what things have looked like for Saskatchewan in the last few years. You can see that the dark blue is where your densities are heavier, and it's really more so the dark brown and the black versus the browns. So the thing about Canada Thistle is it doesn't take a lot of plants to do a lot of damage. So we've got density, it's a challenge. 2021 Saskatchewan Wheat Survey, Canada Thistle is still in one of the top 10. So even though the density is relatively low from a yield loss perspective, the hit's pretty substantial. And I'll talk about that in a couple of slides here. So for those of you in the brown soil zones, you probably don't have a lot of anxiety about thistle. For the dark brown and the black, it's become a much bigger issue over time. How did this happen? Thistle is a very, very tough weed to control. Our cropping patterns have changed, more canola and pulse crops versus 30 years ago. More variable moisture. Some areas have too much in the growing season, some don't have enough. We use a lot more glyphosate right now, and that's both helpful and at the same time it's given us a sense of, we've become a little bit complacent about it because we've relied so heavily on glyphosate. We use a lot of in-crop suppression crop products, which make it look good. The challenge is yield loss, crop competition, and they come right back. There's a lot less chem fallow, or there's chem fallow. Glyphosate in the spring isn't the best option. If you use it enough, then you'll get it, but the last thing we want to do is increase our usage of glyphosate and chem fallow. One of the big drivers is less tillage and summer fallow. So a bit on the biology perspective, it's related to dandelions and sunflowers. Not unlike kochia, it likes pastures, rangeland, waste places. It also goes well in cultivated fields. You'll see it show up in ditches and gravel pits and sand dunes, stuff like that. It prefers clay loam soils, good moisture and full sun. Not unlike kochia, it likes fertilizer and moisture, so it grows very, very well on irrigated land. It's not native to Canada. It came from Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean, Scotland. Again, it was introduced as a contaminant in seed. Bees do like it for honey. Young plants will be grazed by animals. It actually has some benefits for grazers from a, trying to think of the word, natural laxative. Has built-in population control. It is autoallelopathic to other plants next door, especially other thistle plants. Once it gets going, it's a vigorous competitor for light, moisture, and nutrients. Can be a host plant for insects and pathogens, and especially in some of the black and dark browns. Your land values can actually decrease when you try to sell if you've got a bad thistle infestation. Male and female flowers are on separate plants. Flowers are insect pollinated, an average of 1,500 seeds per plant. Seeds can drift a long ways. If you get a good wind when the seeds are mature, you probably notice that that fluff can go a heck of a long ways in the field. But in reality, most of the damage is not done by seed. Seeds can survive 20 years. They can germinate 6 inches deep. But the challenge with thistle is the root spread. In one given year, the vertical roots can go 2 to 3 meters down, 5 meters across, 6 meters across. New shoots will come up from either the vertical or the horizontal roots every 6 to 12 centimeters. And even if you cut them up, a 1/2 inch segment can regenerate if there's sufficient moisture. And here's what it looks like. This is from Purdue University in the US about 20 years ago. The adult plants themselves, they prefer open areas, temperate regions. So the longer the daylight, the better they seem to do. So as you move further north into Saskatchewan, the black soil zones, the Peace region is particularly bad for thistle. Moisture, long daylight. Temperature's not a big issue. Doesn't particularly like extremely hot. It likes moisture. So if you get a lot of rain, it does better. Less rain, not so much. Very, very competitive, and it will crowd out crops and native grass if you leave it alone. And once it's established, it'll spread very, very quickly without crop competition. So here's what it costs. If you're growing a 40 bushel canola crop and you've got 9 shoots per meter, 6 bushels. What's the price of canola today? Can somebody give me an estimate?
Say $12.
Okay, $72. 60 bushel barley or 60 bushel wheat, 15 bushels.
Mm-hmm.
Do the math. It's ugly. So what should we be doing? I spent time in the Peace region and they used to say it's either Lontrell or the chainsaw. We're not there yet. I mentioned summer fallow and tillage. The standard 50 years ago was the fall rosette stage where you'd cultivate up until maybe mid-July, let the plants regrow, and then hit them in August with a high rate of dicamba. Given that for most of Western Canada, we've gone to reduced tillage, that's really not a great option. So not unlike Kochia, the academics are suggesting we start with a systems approach, sanitation. Clean seed, keep your fields clean, don't allow plants to become established or spread. If you have to till, mow, burn, spray, graze patches, clean your equipment, decontaminate your harvest equipment, control plants on the entire farm, which are quite often in the ditch, in the yard, by spraying, mowing, or whatever it takes to remove the weeds. Crop competition from an agronomy perspective is probably the best choice. Start with a crop that's a strong competitor and one that will allow you herbicide use in crops. Cereals is a great option because it's very cost effective. There's lots of options, and it works extremely well in cereals. Scout your fields before you spray, and then choose the appropriate herbicide that's going to give you the best control. The objective is really to reduce your root spread and seeds. Not unlike kochia, maximize your crop competitiveness, good seed, increase your seeding rates, narrow row spacing, put the fertilizer as close as possible for your crop, seed earlier for better crop competition. Now, this one, herbicides are actually probably the better approach right now, given that we're not tilling anymore. Hit often and hit hard. Choose a herbicide which will provide translocation to the root. Glean was pretty good in its day in terms of translocation. We don't have that option anymore, so that means looking at something containing clopyralid, with the exception of those folks who are growing lentils like every second or third year. Clopyralid is not a great option if you're growing lentils, unless you manage your rotations carefully. Spray during good weather. The ideal time for thistle control is either in crop, like that mid-June time frame. Pre-harvest can also be good, provided your weather conditions are relatively stable and you don't have extremes in temperature or drought. If you notice Canada thistle patches that are not being controlled, get them before they go to seed. And in a really severe infestation, tillage can be considered along with summer fallow, but it wouldn't be my first choice. Mm-hmm. From a timing perspective, pre-seed, a lot of labels have thistle suppression on their label. The timing is not great because quite often your thistles have not fully emerged and your translocation is up, not down. As well, when you're doing pre-seed, quite often your weather can be variable. You can have frost at night and 15 during the day. That's not ideal for herbicide translocation to the root. In crop is probably the best timing for consistency. You get a good root kill with clopyralid-based products and the yield potential. The challenge with top growth only or suppression products is your yield loss. And even though it's not something you see in the hoppery because of dockage, it's invisible. It's there. Pre-harvest can be good depending on your weather and your staging. And post-harvest can be a bit challenging because after the crop, you've cut off the top. So if you remove the leaves, you've cut off the best part of the plant for herbicide uptake, and the risk of frost is high. So from a herbicide option perspective, I strongly believe starting with something containing clopyralid, because your cost per acre to get clopyralid added in the mix is very, very little as compared to doing another run across the field with a high clearance. There's a cost to that, then the cost of glyphosate. If you don't have to do that, in crop to me is still one of the best methods for control. There are some phenomenal high performance in crop products. Viking has Larvic and Stavanger. Both of those contain clopyralid. If you're looking to include dandelion and hawksbeard, Larvic is a good option. If you don't have those two, but you really want to pound thistle, kochia, roundleaf mallow, Stavanger is a good fit. In canola, if you're looking at Roundup Ready canola, you can add clopyralid right into your glyphosate. If you're growing Liberty Link, clopyralid and glufosinate do not mix very well. So you could consider doing the first pass with clopyralid and a graminicide if needed, or do your glufosinate first, come back with the clopyralid once you see regrowth. And for post crops, you really have to clean up the fields the fall prior with glyphosate. There is no in-crop option that's going to be any better.
Before we move to the next slide, I'll just mention that we're at about time. So if anybody does have to take off, that's totally cool. We are going to continue on, and this will be posted on our YouTube channel and also on our website as well. But this is good info, and we want to make sure we have all of it before we carry on. So thanks, Brian. I'll just turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I've only got 5 slides left, so we're good.
Cool.
So Dean, last week you asked what should it look like when it's got great control. This is a picture I took a number of years ago when camera technology wasn't as good. This is Dramen or Curtail M, clopyralid plus MCPA. You can see the twisting and the cupping, how the plants have really keeled over versus dried down. That's typically what you see with clopyralid. It will take 2 to 3 weeks to get there, but you spray it, the plants stop growing, and then gradually they will twist and cup to death. So this is a phenomenal in-crop option. And compared to the old standard, here's the level of control you can get with clopyralid versus the old standard Banville MCPA. So quite often I get asked the question, well, should I know I could use clopyralid. I like pre-harvest. Maybe I just go with pre-harvest glyphosate. You know, it's affordable. I'm going to clean up the fields anyways. I've got quack grass or some getaways that I want to use. What the data shows is it's not one or the other. If you're looking for really serious control, it's not clopyralid versus glyphosate, it's clopyralid and glyphosate. When you do that, you take your control levels from 70%, give or take a few, up to 85% and above. And it will come down to looking at the potential return expected for the crop against the cost of additional herbicide and application. And I don't have prices, but I'll bet to put clopyralid in crop is only a few dollars.
Yeah, like clopyralid pricing has come way down from when Montreal first launched and all the rest of it. So it's absolutely an appropriate agronomic decision. One question I often get, though, is I'm not going to get into ounces and stuff. I'm going to talk or milliliters, but like there's the 160 acre rate, and then there's the 100 acre rate or 25 acre a jug rate or 40. And what folks typically ask is, what is the correct level of clopyralid to do in crop so that the plant's going to be in a state where I pre-harvest it, it'll smoke it again? Or is that what would be your take on that?
Clopyralid is a complicated product because it has different rates for different crops. If you're looking at just the suppression rate, probably 160 acres a case would do it. That is the cereal rate when you mix MCPA or 2,4-D with it. The 2,4-D and MCPA are additive, so you add it, you actually increase the control of clopyralid. If you want to get down to I want these things gone, I'm tired of this, then move your rates up to the 170 mil per acre rate. Or if this is life and death for you, 340 mils per acre will nail in this year and stand reduction into the following year as well. So kind of depends what you want to do. But for canola, the label rate is 170, cereals, it's 112. You can kind of decide if you are planning on going in pre-harvest, between 112 and 170, depending on your conditions. The better your growing conditions, the lower the rate will still get you decent results.
Yeah. Perfect. Question from Wilson or comment?
Yeah, it was just concerning the high rate of clopyralid. I noticed it has like suppression into the following year. So is that like a soil active component that's damaging the Canada thistle as it comes up through the ground, or what is that?
Yeah, it's to prevent seed germination. Clopyralid does have residual, so when you go to the high rate, it increases that residual a bit so that it keeps plants from regrowing, but also seeds from reseeding until much later in the year, if at all.
Oh, okay, so it prevents the seeds from germinating. That's how it works. Okay.
And that's why you can't grow lentils the year after as well, because you've got that residual in the soil they might come up, but they will definitely not make a crop.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
that's where, to me, the canola timing is the right one based on your canola, wheat, lentil rotation, so that the clopyralid's all gone for that 2 years down the road type of a thing from a risk perspective, maybe.
exactly. And look at your rotation when you're managing thistle. So if you're in a 3-year rotation, you need 1 clear year before you grow pulse crops. Now, peas are slightly different because peas have a higher level of tolerance. So that's where if you use a clopyralid-based product like Stavanger, Larvic, or the lower rate of clopyralid, if you get sufficient moisture in that year, you can grow peas. But it's a little bit more sensitive. So, but lentils, definitely not. Chickpeas and lentils, definitely not.
Okay.
So not unlike Kochia, it comes back to integrated weed management. Hit this thing from all sides, seed a competitive crop, scout your fields. If you see thistles, hit them. Waiting till the fall is costing you money, and you're letting the problem get worse before it gets better. I've never heard somebody say, I'm going to suppress my wild oats and then come back in the fall. I'm going to suppress my hemp nettle and I'll come back and hit them later. You wouldn't do that. Thistles should be treated the same. Follow up in fall with a pre-harvest or after harvest if needed, recognizing the limits of post-harvest are your weather conditions and your plant growth. And consider tillage as an additional management tool if needed. If you're returning back to summer follow, it makes sense, but don't do tillage unless absolutely needed, given that we have better herbicide options for this one. That's all I had this morning, Dean.
Yeah, I just rethought what I just said, and just thinking through your rotation, you want to take the benefit of the pulses for your cereals typically. So the wheat year would be the ideal year to go hard on it, and then tune it up in the canola, I think, and then back to the pulse again. But anyway, yeah. So
yeah,
go ahead.
If you're in a wheat canola pulse rotation, hit it hard in your wheat, like really hard. Your canola, you've got suppression options, then do your pre-harvest with your canola to clean up your fields for lentils.
There you go. Yeah.
And that's also the cheapest option as well, because cereals is your cheapest thistle control option.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, if you don't mind, unless somebody wants to look at any of the slides, just if you don't mind on sharing your thing and we can see each other. I want to just thank you guys for taking the time and hanging out with us today. It's an open floor. Is there any questions or anything that we maybe missed that you'd like touched on again? Perfect. Well, that's great. Well, thanks everybody. Thank you so much.
Just a note before you go, Dean.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of uncertainty out there right now. I'm starting to hear rumblings that supplies of some actives globally might be limited. So when you're making your plans, talking to your customers, you might want to start thinking about whatever product it is, Viking or otherwise. Now's the time to maybe lock it in.
Right. Yeah. You guys are out of bromoxynil for the season now for new orders, correct?
Yeah.
What other molecules seem to be top of mind for that then that are at risk?
Carfentrazone's tight globally. I'm hearing things about prothioconazole potentially might be tight globally as well. Now, right now, that's just rumors. But what I don't want to have happen is we get some good rains this year, and all of a sudden there's a scramble for product. Some of the bigger companies sell out. Everybody's scrambling. So I'm not recommending to book everything today from a farmer perspective, but start locking in some inventory.
That's a really good point. And like in your guys' situation, as it is with many, like it's don't expect everything to be in the warehouse because there's going to be people that have speculated. Maybe they've got the capacity to cash flow and have the fungicide sitting in the shed or what have you, but having something to cover it off, and that's whether it's a half section or a section worth of insecticide on standby for when you get home on a bad night and you see, oh geez, there's something to do. It's never a bad practice to have that same thing goes to some fungicide and whatnot. But if nothing else, to have the discussion that if like for all of my suppliers, if there's an indication that, you know what, if we get north of 6 or 8 inches of rain, I have plans of doing my regular fungicide application versus we're gonna, just live and breathe each day at a time and decide. Communication's really, really helpful. And because today, if I order new stuff, you got to add 6 weeks or whatever it is from the time it ends up from a port somewhere else into our warehouses here and stuff. So there will be a bit of a backstop, but it's definitely not enough to look after everyone. So that's a very good point, Brian.
Well, and it's not just us. It's, 30 years ago, big companies had lots of, I'll call it surge capacity, where, okay, you need something in season. You had a couple of plants in the US where, they crank it up, do a couple of overtime shifts, and away you go. It's now a globalized business, or even the majors are sourcing product from all over the globe, and they don't have that surge capacity because nobody in the industry wants inventory. And whether that's Corteva, Syngenta, Bayer, nobody likes carrying inventory. Distributors don't like carrying inventory. So the whole system has been titrated a lot tighter than it was even a few years ago. Nobody wants to carry product over.
Exactly. I'm going to share a slide here about that real quick while we're shooting the breeze here. It'll just take me a second here. Okay. All right, baby, where are you? That's just some other stuff I got. I wanted to show, you guys can see that, but when you take a look at, this is some global stuff. So in terms of sales, you've got your different companies on the side. You got Syngenta and Bayer, BASF, Corteva, and all the rest of it. So here's their line from basically 2011 or so up to 2023. So some are static, some are growing good and whatnot. And then you've got, so this is the branded stuff, and here's the generic stuff. You got your bigger generics, Adama and UPL and Alba and iFarm and stuff. And then you've got the new ones. You got Sharda, Viking would be a blip on here somewhere as you're just getting rolling and all the rest of it. But you can see the trends of where they're marketing. So what that means for these companies, when they see the big dogs are going down, what do you think they're trying to speculate on and have an inventory and crap sitting in the shed, right? That's a lot of risk, a lot of dollars at risk and all the rest of it. And then when you take a look at what's happening on the commodity prices and stuff, they're obviously impacted by that. And again, you got this is maize, corn, beans, wheat, rice, cotton. Like canola is not even on the radar for this because it's a small player globally, but they try to factor those types of things into things. And then you've got the active prices that are available. And so we all remember back in 22 where we had our $14 glufosinate and all the rest of it. So everything right down is here now, which is flirting around the cost of production. What that means is the margins aren't sitting here. It didn't cost them more typically to buy or to manufacture stuff, because they would have, yes, the cost of some of the actives would have been different, but there was absolutely some opportunities. And then we ended up with a schwack of inventory that they had to burn through. So they took some losses for a bit. So there's that. And let me just, the one interesting thing I wanted to put here. Sorry, guys. I think it's right. Is it this one? Yeah. So when you take a look at how the crop protection forecast is, again, like if you have stagnating prices and all the rest of it, that's where your profitability will be. But if it does go back to normal trends with good pricing and tariffs and all the rest of it, the investment is going to go back into where this here is, what these guys are putting into their R&D. Like Brian made a very good comment relating to what their what new chemistries are coming around, and that in the next little bit. And we're talking big dollars, and we're talking multi-years of investment and all the rest of it. So you're seeing a more of a focus on the whole bio side, because that's where the low-hanging fruit and the cash is going to be, versus new chemistries, because again, all the groupings have been done and they're going to put different stickers on and different blends. in the coming, years that you're going to see, but a lot of that stuff is still baked in. So point being, there's not an overabundance of cash available for guys to just be sitting on stuff and specking on it. So you have to be a planner and mitigate that risk. Another thing that was interesting, this is from a Southeast Asia report, 20% of the products that are being put out there are pirated. They're not even registered products and all the rest of it. So 20% of the market has just disappeared from that, from being a measurable thing on their P&Ls, other than, they're selling less. And so there's a very concerted effort to police that, and you're going to see some screws coming down elsewhere globally. Here we're very regulated and all the rest of it, but we also have the dynamic of the branded products going down, and we've got the non branded stuff, the post-patent stuff coming up. So everybody's being very disciplined on that side about how they're going to be spec'ing on any product. So just wanted to throw that out there real quick.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is we don't really know what impact exchange rates are going to have. We don't know what tariffs are going to do. A lot of what's made, a lot of petrochemicals or a lot of ag crop inputs are still petroleum based. So in theory, at least, oil prices are down. That should help pricing. But then you've got the exchange rate bouncing. Canadian dollar is starting to come up a little bit. It went down. Tariffs, no one really knows. Are they going to stay? Are they going to go? Is China going to get hit? Is the US going to pound Canada? There's a lot of uncertainty right now. Uncertainty can work for you sometimes, but sometimes it's your worst enemy.
Yeah. I like that approach. And the thing is too, in terms of the commodity prices, like I showed on them slides, we're on the lower end of where pricing is. Don't wait for it to go down more or something. Just buy the stuff if you think you need it. Like just pull the trigger and be done with it, versus trying to play it around. Yeah, there'll be maybe 5 or 10 cents you can get out of a retail different on this and that, depending on what you want to do with that. But if you have a plan, just don't be waiting for a magic thing to happen. That'll be a big change downwards. There'll be a scarcity model that could come into play, which Brian indicated. Great. So thanks, Brian. This has been fun. Thank you for your time and attention and all this great resources. And I'll circle back with you and Riley about if there's something else for us to touch on that you think is useful. But we'll just leave that for another day. And I've got my phone, guys, if anybody wants anything else. But thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye for now.